I've had the chance to witness firsthand just the power of people results and the power of having good, clear people strategies, not just HR processes that are designed to transact people in and out your door, but a clear people strategy when you're executing those processes. I did have the chance, as Anthony said, yes, to learn from the Disney leadership philosophy as a cast member. But let me tell everybody a story before I get into some of the nuts and bolts of everything here about why I know that these are the most important things that anybody can do in their business, and that's making sure you have good people business. Now, simply put, every business is a people business. And 10 years ago, I inherited a large team of 40 people. And those 40 people were responsible for scheduling, planning, and dispatching anywhere between 550 to 800 buses here in the region. And basically, their role was to make sure that our economy kept going day after day after day. So it was a pretty big responsibility. Now, let me tell you what I inherited. I inherited people on my team that we didn't know where they were 30 to 40% of the time. We didn't know if they were showing up for work that day. We didn't know um, if they'd even be in or how late they would be. It would be hours at times. And we we simply would say their shift starts at 3 a.m. We'll see by 6 if they're coming to work today or not. Not good. That was not good. So we had that problem. We had turnover of people that was well over 50%. Well over 50%. So that was expensive. And we mentioned earlier today how much turnover costs. So you can imagine what the cost of that was in unfilled shifts, overtime, training, all that type of stuff. We had KPI calls every week, and we mentioned earlier about the use of the term KPI in job descriptions, but we had them at that company. And every week, the way it worked is the leader of whichever team, we would go through each incident um, that week that had occurred. And the leader of the team that was responsible for not preventing that incident had to speak as to what had happened and how they're going to rectify it going forward. And I was speaking constantly on that KPI call because our team was not executing. And the last thing is that I had a cell phone that rang nonstop, all the time, day and night. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do next? And I kind of thought to myself, well, wait a second. I think that that's your decision and that's what you're paid to do. You should know what to do next, right? And you should be motivated to do it. So I knew that we had a people issue here. People were not being led the right way. And so the way I started managing my operational team was not by focusing on managing the operation itself, but by focusing on managing the people strategy and the HR processes within it. And I thought back to myself, where have I worked before that this issue did not occur? And it was at Disney. And so I sought out mentorship from the gentleman who ran Walt Disney World when I worked there. And I dug in deep, right? How do we set in the right people strategies processes to make sure that this works? Now, let me tell you what the results were. I told you earlier about people that didn't show up to work 30 to 40% of the time. I had multiple people who did that. That number went down significantly. I didn't have any more people who did that. But more importantly, we tracked attendance. And on a large team like that, I only had to open it up maybe a handful of times a month when somebody was a little bit late or called in sick. So we had much better results there. The second result is I talked about that turnover rate. We went to a much more healthy turnover rate of 5 to 10%. That is a healthy turnover rate, 5 to 10%. So that was vastly improved. That KPI call I was telling you about, once we had the right team in place, even though that team was responsible for executing all of the service for that company and should have been called on a lot, I actually went on a 2-year streak in that KPI call where I did not have to speak. But the biggest reward of all was that after about 3 years of working hard to implement the right people strategies, that cell phone stopped ringing. That cell phone stopped ringing. And to the point where even though I had that level of responsibility, it only rang maybe 5 times a year during work or outside of work hours. It was remarkable. It was amazing. But the way that we did it was by, even though it was an operational role, was implementing HR strategies and people strategies. And why? It's because every business is a people business. So you're probably wondering to yourself, what were those strategies? What were they? It was three simple things that we did. Hire them right, train them right, and treat them right. And the biggest thing about that is that you can have all the HR policies, all the HR practices in the world, all the different pillars of an effective HR management system, from performance management to recruiting processes to onboarding. We're going to talk about all that. But none of it matters if your mindset is not here. And it's all about having a mindset about hiring the right people, training them the right way, and treating them the right way to set them up for success, to let them do their job so you can get out of their way so they can do their job. It's about empowerment, an empowerment mindset. So I want to talk to you today a little bit about those three things: hiring right, training right, and treating right. Let's start with hiring right. And here's why. Hiring the right people is, simply put, the number one priority for every small business owner or every business owner, period. It doesn't matter what else you have in your organization. You can have the best product in the world. You can have the best processes in the world. You could have the best people in the world there, or so you think. But if you do not hire the right people to leverage all that, none of it is going to matter, right? Policies, processes, products do not matter if you don't have people there that are motivated to execute on your team's mission. And simply put, everything begins with who walks through your door every day. Who walks through your door matters. And hiring is the number one priority that you have as far as it comes to meeting any sort of financial bottom line or operational success. And it is the number one lever that you can pull. Why is that? Well, people are your competitive advantage. The reality is that most of you, pretty much all of you, are in businesses in some way where you have competitors. You're not the only person to provide what you provide. Most of us aren't. Pretty much all of us aren't. Who your people are going to be your competitive advantage. Who your people are what's going to make the difference. People want to do business and support businesses that they like to do business with. And if your people are not making that a friendly, convenient, hassle-free experience, or an experience that aligns with your brand and what you want the brand to be, then it will not happen. People are your competitive advantage. More than one person can do what you do. But that's why your people matter, because your people will decide whether or not other people want to do business with your organization as opposed to your competitors. If you have the right people, they will take action for you. I was just telling you about how when I inherited that team, right? When I inherited that team, how I was constantly having to pick up the phone and solve problems that people were paid to solve. If you have the right people, they will take action for you. They will make the decisions like they're supposed to make for you. They will not ask you to make them for them. If you have good people that are motivated for the role, they are going to not only just do the job, but they're going to think of ways to do it better. Mitchell mentioned about innovating, having good diversity on your team so that we can innovate and adapt sooner. You need good self-motivated people who are also going to think about ways to adapt and innovate. And you need more perspectives than your own on where to go next with your team or your business. And so if you're not hiring right and you're not hiring self-motivated people who want to do that, then your team and your business will stagnate. Simply put, it will stagnate. So now that we know how important it is to hire right, I meet a lot of people who think they're really good at it. I meet a lot of people who think they're really good at it. A lot of people say, "Oh, I just go with my gut," and I'm very often not right. But then when we ask those people how it's going, a recent survey suggests that over 66% of business leaders reported making disappointing hires. 66%, the exact number was actually 68% of people reported making disappointing hires. The number one characteristic that they reported, 63% said that they had people that were giving them poor work qualities. That means they're unproductive because you can't use their work. 63% of people also said that they did not work well with others. So they're uncooperative. 62% had a negative attitude. So they were unhappy. 49% received customer complaints. So they were unfriendly. 48% couldn't meet deadlines. So we had people that were unreliable. Now, if you peel the curtain back, 76% of employee turnover can be traced to poor hiring practices, hiring the wrong person. 76%. I mentioned earlier when Tammy was presenting that employee turnover can cost you 30 to 40% of their annual earnings on average. If you got better and you reduced the amount of your turnover from poor hiring practices, how much money could you save and how much more productivity could you get by having the right people in the right place? Why is this happening? Well, it's simple. We simply do not have the right processes in place to identify high achievers and hire them for our roles. We just don't. Over 80% of people whose who part of their job descriptions is to hire for a living, is to make hiring decisions, have no training on how to hire or how to interview. Imagine that. A lot of us might be in different businesses that require some sort of technical training. Imagine if you had no training on something that is likely the number one priority for you as a leader and how to do it well. Imagine that. So let's talk about hiring right. Let's talk about hiring right and what that means. In order to hire right, you want to hire high achievers for your business. I think that goes without saying. You want high achievers in your roles. What is a high achiever? A lot of people ask me. Well, a high achiever, there's nothing particularly special about them. As a matter of fact, a high achiever is a normal person, an ordinary person who is able to achieve above average or extraordinary results. An ordinary person who is able to achieve above average or extraordinary results. And all high achievers share three things. They share three things. The first thing they share is they share skills for the job that they are hired for. And this is actually, quite frankly, where a lot of interviewers and hiring managers go wrong. They over focus on skill. Well, how do they do that? Well, they look at somebody's resume and they say it looks like they have experience. So they're trying to gauge their skill. Or they know them from somewhere and they've seen them from somewhere. So they think they have skill, they have degrees or credentials or certifications, and they think they have skill. But unfortunately, skill is just one part of the equation because for anybody who's watched sports or has been told by their parents, if only you applied yourself here, would know that just because you have the skill or the talent or the ability does not mean that you are going to or you want to use it. So skill is just one part of the equation. What are the other two things? Well, the second thing is a self-motivated I can attitude. Why? Because in order for high achievers to succeed, they need to overcome obstacles on the way to get there and they need to achieve goals. They have to be unafraid of failing so that way they can learn how to succeed and have a good attitude about overcoming obstacles and a belief that they can figure it out even when they do not yet know the answer. So you need skill, but if that skill doesn't have an I can attitude, then they're not going to use the skill. What's the last thing that they need? Well, they also need to have internal passion for the role. They need to be passionate about the work that they are doing. Why? It's because they need energy. They need energy to overcome those obstacles and use those skills. And if they do not enjoy what they are doing, if they do not have passion for the tasks required of the job, right? If they do not have that, then they are not going to have energy to repeatedly overcome those obstacles and use those skills over and over and over again. A great example of this would be, say, the art of knitting or crocheting. I'm sure that I could learn the skill, and I think that I am self-motivated. I mean, I do own my own business, so if I do not have self-motivation, then that is not good. And I've been in business for 5 years. However, I'm probably not passionate enough about that hobby to do much more with it than to learn. It will not give me energy. And so, for a high achiever to have sustained use of their passion and their I can attitude, you also have to be plugging them in to the type of job or the type of role that's going to give them that energy. And the bottom line for that is that high achievers are the key to business success. Imagine over 80% of people out there do not have training on how to identify or hire right. They do not have training on how to identify or hire right. They just don't. Imagine if you were in the 20% or less that did, and you had the ability to identify high achievers. Imagine how successful your business would be. So, how do you identify high achievers? Well, from an HR practice perspective and in the realm of hiring right, I can tell you that the most powerful tool that you can use and the most important piece of that success that I had in that role I was telling you about was learning and introducing motivation-based interviewing. It is simply the only way to identify high achievers. And it closes holes in outdated interviewing techniques. I'm sure a lot of people who have done some research on interviewing may have heard of behavioral-based interviewing, but behavioral-based interviewing is actually not very consistent in how it asks questions. And the way that it asks questions actually leaves a lot of room for people to wiggle through that otherwise should not. And how does it do it? Well, it asks questions in a way that forces people to actually genuinely demonstrate their skill and attitude. They have to genuinely demonstrate their skill and attitude in a way that does not allow them to disingenuously, sorry, make them look more skilled or have a better attitude than they really have. So not only does it reveal their skill and attitude, but it also reveals that third component, what they're passionate about. And it does it in a way where it allows you to kind of be their career coach in the interview. And their career, and you can identify if this is the type of role that's going to give them energy or not. And because of that, it's the only way that we select candidates in our business. It is the only way that we will select candidates at Best Culture Solutions on behalf of our clients. And it works so well that we also have a guarantee with any hire that we make. And it's that if that person leaves your business within the first year of hire, then we will replace them at no extra charge. It is a guarantee that we've only had to use 2 times, and both times it was because that person was indeed a strong candidate, and then they got poached. And then they got poached. Now, if you're wondering, how can you find out more about motivation-based interviewing? I have to apologize. I do not have the slide on this deck, but you can visit a website called hireauthority.com, H-I-R-E, authority.com. I'll put it in the chat later. And you could also go on Amazon and find Amazon's #1 book on hiring, and it is called, simply put, Motivation-Based Interviewing. The author is Carol Quinn. We also do provide training on hiring right or motivation-based interviewing. If you go to the hireauthority.com website, you can actually take courses either online that are open to the public or book private training, and I'm a facilitator for that. Or there's other facilitators. But I will tell you that the #1 HR people strategy that you could ever deploy, the most important one is hiring right and hiring people that have the skills for the role, a great I can attitude, and are passionate about the work that you're asking them to do. That is the secret sauce. It seems simple enough, and yet so few people do it right or well. And this is your chance to do both. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking about hiring right. Let's talk a little bit about what do we do once they're in the door? And that is training them right, right? Remember, the three-pronged approach to successful HR is hiring them right, training them right, and treating them right. So let's talk about the training them right piece. And this is really about getting the right person in the door who's self-motivated, is passionate, and has the skills, and then taking them and setting them up for success. Now, I talked earlier about retention, right? I talked earlier about retention and the cost of turnover and why retention is important. A memorable onboarding program increases retention by 82%. Why does it do that? Well, simple. When people are empowered and they feel like they know and they have clarity around how to do their jobs, they are happier in their jobs and they get energy from their jobs. And you do not lose those high performers when they become frustrated and do not have, they are not enabled to do what they're passionate about that they do. You have a good onboarding program, you can increase your retention by 82%. And not just because it's a money equation, but because, again, people are empowered to do the job and they like that. So you get the right people in place, and then you empower them and show them and unlock for them how to do the job well and how you need it done in your company. Now, here's what I always say. I have seen people that have onboarding programs before, and I'm sure you've all seen the same, where people, when they onboard, they're given a stack of rules. A lot of times there's safety rules and company policies, and they're told to read the book and sign off, and everybody goes on their merry way. But I'm here to tell you that that is not a memorable onboarding experience. That just isn't. It's like every other onboarding experience that most people see. Onboarding, simply put, next to hiring, is your next most biggest important opportunity to make your people your brand. And the first thing that you need to communicate with people to have an onboarding program is what is their purpose? Why are they there? And you're probably wondering, well, what does that even mean? Well, when I was working in transportation, it wasn't necessarily that our purpose was to transport people from point A to point B. Like I said, there's more than one company that can do that. Our purpose was truly about giving people the peace of mind to know that they would get to work every day without the hassle and get home to see their families every night. That was our purpose. So think about what your business is really selling. Think about what your business is really selling. If you think about it, McDonald's does not really sell food. I mean, yes, they are technically selling food, and that is the vehicle through which they do this, but what they're really selling you is convenience, right? Apple is not selling you the latest, best phone. I mean, a lot of times, technically speaking, people do believe that their hardware might be a little bit behind. But what they're selling people is user friendliness and the coolest new gadget. They're not selling phones. At Disney, when I worked there, I had the chance again to work at Walt Disney World in Florida, and that was amazing. But we were not selling people theme parks. We were not selling people food. We were not selling people screams and thrills. We were selling people the best vacation of their lives. So in your onboarding program, the first thing you need to do is decide what is your purpose. And what I mean by that is what are you really selling people? And before you talk to anybody that starts with your company about any rules or policies, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. You are going to need to communicate those rules and those expectations 100%. But don't make this about giving them rules. Make this about giving them purpose and tell them first and foremost, why are we here? What do we do for people? What do we do for our community? And then you can talk about rules, but you need to give people a purpose first. Otherwise, the rules have no point. So again, what are you really selling people? Make sure you're clear about that. We want everybody to have the best vacation of our lives. For our business, we want to make sure that the right people are in careers that they can thrive in and they're set up to do so. And that's how we help people. That's how we help people. But then after this, you want to tell people what your company is good at. Play to those strengths. Play to those strengths in the onboarding program. And what are your values? A lot of companies have core values. Here's how I define values. Values are the shared behaviors and beliefs of your team. They're the shared behaviors and beliefs of your team. And then you also want to share with them in your onboarding program, how do you make decisions? And here's what I mean by that. So I like to talk about my time at Disney a lot. And at Disney, they had a pretty simple rule. They said, look, we can train you all we want. But the reality is that I can't train you to see every single situation that you might ever see. I cannot train you to see every single situation that you might ever see. And so if you're not sure what to do, we have four criteria that we want you to put your decision through. The first criteria is safety. Start at safety. Am I about to make a safe decision? Am I about to make a safe decision? The second criteria is courtesy, right? Disney is known for their customer service. So is this decision courteous? Now, we put safety before courtesy. Why? Well, I could be nice as pie to you, but if I do something unsafe, you're not going to really want to come back. Safety, then courtesy. The third consideration was show. You're probably wondering, what does show mean? Well, if you've been to Disney World, everything is part of the show. The sets, the way things look, how clean it is, how people act. Does your decision contribute to the show and the story that we're trying to tell people, or does it take away from the show? And then the fourth criteria was efficiency. Now, it doesn't mean efficiency is not important. As a matter of fact, we always want to get more efficient at what we do. But um, if efficiency comes at the expense of courtesy or safety, then it's not worth it. So it is still a priority. But what I recommend that you do in your onboarding program, if you want people to be able to make decisions on their own and be empowered, is come up with your 3 to 4 priorities. How do you want people to make decisions when they don't have information on how to do so otherwise? How do you want people to make decisions? And come up with 3 to 4 things in that order. Don't make them equal. It has to be in that order. It has to be in that order. And then people will be able to make decisions. Now, after this, yes, does your onboarding program need to talk about policies and rules? You bet. But if you don't start with purpose and why people are there and give them a sense of purpose, then those rules are meaningless because they have to pay or they have to be able to play back to the purpose of your company. And as you're explaining those rules, then what you want to do is you also want to say, how does this rule help us meet our purpose, not just what the rule is? So if we have rules about safety, we can say, well, and we want to have this rule because we can create the best vacation for people when they're safe, right? Or you need to be in the right frame of mind if there's a rule around coming to work under the influence. That's, if people come to work that way, then we're not creating a safe vacation environment for our guests. But make sure that before you talk about rules in your onboarding program, if you want to make it memorable, then you need to discuss why you're here and how we make decisions, and then talk about rules. Now, the last component is treating people right. I've talked about how it's a three-pronged approach. Hire them right, train them right, treat them right. A very simple philosophy. Hiring right is the most important thing you can do. The second most important thing you can do is training them right. That's your first impression. But the third important thing that you can do is once you have the right people through the door and you've trained them up, if you do not treat them right, they are going to leave. They are going to leave. And it's all really about a mindset of real inclusiveness. Mitchell at Pride YMM did a great job talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he had so many good points to make. But the biggest point that he made was that um, the benefit of diversity, equity, and inclusion is that you're able to innovate better. You're able to have more opinions that represent society on your team, right? And you're able to have all that. And why do you want that? So that way you can make decisions that reflect society, not just your own preconceived bias or notion. You get diversity of thought, you innovate, faster and you get better faster. That's why you want diversity, equity, and inclusion. But unless you cross the bridge into real inclusiveness and you give up some level of control to your people, then you will not ever fully get the benefit of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And here's what I mean by that. You need to include people in your decision-making process. You need to include people in your decision-making process. Now, I gather that you probably cannot ask everybody for their opinion before you order office supplies, right? Before you make that decision. And you cannot ask everybody before you make every decision, but there's things that you can do to invite their input to guide you when you're making those decisions and to understand their perspectives. So that way you understand what the implication of your decisions are on the people who work for you and then their perspectives on what your customers really need. And it's important that as you are deploying traditional HR tools, such as compensation reviews and culture surveys and investigations when you need them, or performance management, that you are thinking about or using that mindset that it isn't about just checking the box or doing transactions. It's about hiring the right people, training the right way, and treating them right. And as you're using these tools, considering what the different points of views might be, what the different perspectives might be, and knowing them. So that way, when you have to use these tools and you have to make decisions, right, that you understand the diverse implications and the diverse perspectives that are around you on your team and are around you with your customer base. And how do you do that? Well, there's many ways that you can create clarity for people through inclusion, and not only just for other people, but for yourself. So you want to create clarity. You want to treat people right, make it clear for them what needs to be done, what the rules are, and how they're going to go forward, and what the conditions of employment are. You can do it through surveys, right? One of my favorite tools is an anonymous survey that is facilitated anonymously, where we ask people things. It's almost like doing an exit interview, but they haven't exited yet. How are you enjoying employment here? What would you change? If you were me, if you were the decision maker and you could change one thing that would improve things for the working conditions here or improve things for our customers or improve a process, what is the number one thing that you could pick? What's the number one thing that you would pick? Forums, right? Take your team aside and say, and have an agenda. I used to have a quarterly meeting with my large team where I would ask them, what's going well? I would just have open conversation. What's going well right now? And then I'd have an open conversation about what could we do differently, or what is there a lack of clarity on? Are there any rules or processes that you don't understand? Are there any rules or processes that you don't think work well? Let's have a conversation about that. What are you hearing from our customers? What do you think could be different? Let's talk about those things. Let's talk about those things. And daily interactions. I would tell you that daily interactions are vitally important, and here's how you can do them. First of all, you need to walk your business. You need to get off the carpet and onto the concrete, as one of my mentors used to say. What does that mean? Well, your office is carpet, and a lot of times the front lines are concrete. One of the biggest and best things that I learned from my time at Disney is that if you want to apply people strategies in HR well, you need to know the business and the implications of what you're doing. And you simply do not understand that as well as people on the front lines because you're in an office and they aren't. You are in an office while they are actually putting what you've put into place into action. They are actually the ones doing or following the direction you set and that fully understand the implications of your direction. And so at Disney, it was pretty simple. Leaders there were required to spend half the day, even at the executive level, half the day in the business. In the business. They had to spend half the day in the business. And what did that mean? Getting out from behind your desk and walking around and just talking to people. Talking to people that worked for you, talking to people that are guests or customers to see what's going on. Just get out in the business and talk to people. Get out in the business and talk to people. People before paper is another great example. I would come in every day when I had a large team and I'd literally go to everybody and I'd leave enough time to do this before I had to be in the office and say, how's it going today? If they had ongoing initiatives with me or action items, I'd say, how's progress on this? Just leave it open-ended, not judgmental or why aren't you done yet, but just how's it coming? Or my favorite, and this is the one that got people really amazed, they couldn't believe it. Is there anything I can help you with today? Is there anything that I can help you with today? People couldn't believe that their boss was asking that. And they said, well, what do you mean, can you help me with anything? They said, I don't know. Is there anything I can help you with today? Is there any questions? Is there anything that you need clarity on? And a lot of times I would just take the approach where when I ask that question, I might put it back on them and say, well, what do you think? But at least it fostered the conversation and we could gain clarity together. Because again, we want them ultimately to act on their own. So a lot of times I'd fire it back and say, well, what do you think? But at least by having that open relationship where we could talk about things that we might be struggling with, they brought it up and we could talk through it together. I can get their opinion. And sometimes by asking them what they think, I might learn that my assumptions were wrong and I can improve and get better. But it made a difference, made a huge difference. So before you touch your paper, go and talk to your people. You find out really quickly what's going on and what decisions you need to make. And when you're doing things like setting those performance management tools or expectations, creating your policies, creating your training programs and hiring, you get better insights as to what you truly need. The last thing that you can do is actually do the jobs of the people that you're leading. And I know this is hard for small business owners, but if it's something that you can do once a month, set some time aside, and you will understand specifically what they are doing and how it looks. And you will understand even better as you're making decisions or building your business, what are the implications of the decisions that you're making on the people who have to execute them. And talking to your people, doing their jobs, shadowing their shifts, getting rolling up your sleeves and actually doing it makes all the difference with being able to apply these tools. So with that, HR and people strategies are really about leadership philosophy, and every person at every level in your organization should be thinking in the mindset of a leader. They should be thinking in the mindset of a leader and being leaders and how to lead, because everybody is required to take the lead on something. And that is an HR and people strategy is an invaluable tool, is setting that expectation that people will be expected to be leaders. Because if you think about it, the CEO or the owner or founder of a business is a leader in the sense that they take the lead on all the things they take the lead on. But the frontline person is being asked and required to take the lead on other things, right? If it's the person that cleans something, they have to show leadership by showing initiative to get it done and get it done well, right? Back when I think about transportation, the person who drove the bus when I was there, they were the leaders. They were the captains of the ship, so to speak. People were relying on them to take the lead on their safety. Every single person in your business is a leader. And so, in order to cultivate that as an HR strategy, I could not recommend more this book. It's called Creating Magic by Lee Cockrell. Now, Lee Cockrell was the gentleman I referred to earlier. He was the executive vice president of operations at Walt Disney World. And he is particularly talented at building on some of the stuff that we talked about earlier with Mitchell regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it's really all about inclusion at the end of the day and having an inclusive leadership style. And it's something that he actually pioneered 30 years before a lot of it started being seen here in Fort McMurray. And when I worked there in 2002, they were leaders in all areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, including providing benefits to couples regardless of gender identity. So it's a great book, and it helps you hire the right people, train them the right way, and treat them the right way. And it was invaluable for me. You can also ask us to help you. We offer direct people strategy help through Best Culture Solutions. We can help you with your recruitment. So we can do that ever important thing of hiring the right people right the first day or the first time. We can help you with making sure that they're set up for success with a memorable onboarding experience and all other functions of HR, including if you're a smaller business, we can help with giving you part-time support. A lot of businesses might not have the workload or the staff or the budget to get a full-time HR manager, and so we're able to help with a part-time approach so that we can get what you need. But all that to say, a lot of businesses put people strategies last. And that is a mistake because as I mentioned earlier, it costs a lot of money when it does not go well, either through turnover, and that's the obvious low-hanging fruit where people strategies can go wrong. But even if you think about it, having the right people strategy of hiring them right, training them right, and treating them right is the most important thing that you can do for your bottom line and operational success because now you're unlocking people's ability to take action on your behalf. And so we are able to help and we love to help, and we can be found at bestculturesolutions.ca. With that, I have 5 minutes left if anybody has any questions, but I really appreciate you hanging out today and listening to the three-pronged approach around hiring right, training right, and treating right. And thanks for having me to the Fort McMurray Chamber of Commerce as well.